Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we look at what's really going on in the world of the BRICS. Now today I want to talk about why the BRICS members want to build a multipolar world that balances the lopsided nature of the current global situation. Now for decades the West, led by the US, has been the primary global arbiter of policy. However, the countries outside the West have been unhappy with the global rules established by the West and the US, but this are the stated but really unclear components of their rules-based order. Now, for the BRICS to develop an alternative world order, as in a new multipolar world, it's essential to understand the serious shortcomings of the current situation. Now, the key issues of the current international order are not with its values or institutions, but how they are implemented and managed. The US dominated and led international order has in practice been based on the US's whims, rules and strategic interests rather than those of the UN or a global consensus. Now, from a strategic standpoint, the US and its allies, or vassals I like to call them, have divided Europe, the Middle East and East Asia. Now, following the end of the Cold War, the US and its partners sought to engage Russia economically and in the energy sector with a view to stabilising global energy markets. However, they excluded Moscow from the European security mechanisms. They expanded NATO to Russia's borders and they ignored its concerns. And we can now see the consequences of this, which is the Ukraine conflict. In the Middle East, the BRICS member Iran is excluded from any peace mechanism for over 4 decades and has been subjected to economic sanctions, political and indirectly military pressure throughout that time. US allies in the Middle East have also attempted to impose their security costs on the US by making sure Washington was involved in all the regional and domestic conflicts, which have destabilised the whole region in Iraq and Syria, for example, particularly. Now a similar approach is being taken with China in East Asia. The US benefits from the Chinese market as an economy, and it engages with China in manufacturing, investment and trade. However, in order to counter China's military power, it now feels it's necessary to get into a level of conflict. That's why China is now regarded as a security risk. Emphasising the perceived threat from China helps the US to try and limit Beijing's economic power and influence. Now, this approach also benefits other parties by creating the perception of adversaries and enemies. It's easier to justify the $850 billion military budget annually and to convince the public that they're protecting the country from external threats. So essentially, Russia is the main bogeyman and now is being joined by China. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website, SCOBRICSInsight.com, to further develop it. You can do this by making a small donation, which is done by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Everybody who does donate does get a personal thank you from me. Thank you in advance. Now, by identifying and naming potential adversaries in the region or global context, the US aims to exert control and influence over its allies and its so-called partners. Without such an approach, US allies in Europe, the Middle East and East Asia would probably be more inclined to pursue their strategic autonomy and have independent foreign policies. However, by manipulating their allies and their partners, the US seeks to gain the upper hand over its perceived rivals, which are China, Iran and Russia. And focusing on these perceived threats, competitors will be unable to capitalise on the real opportunities and realise their economic and strategic potential. Let's face it, the United States has been involved in so many military conflicts for a longer period of time than any other country in history. From a political standpoint, the most significant shortcoming is its use of double standards. Despite espousing the virtues of a rules-based international order, the US and its allies have demonstrated a serious disregard for those principles in their actions in Yugoslavia, the Ukraine, and the broader Middle East. I mean, the United States and its allies have been involved in numerous instances of human rights violations, international and humanitarian law violations, and the development of nuclear weapons among their actions that contradict their stated values. And it's evident that the violations of human rights, international and humanitarian laws, as well as the occupation, invasion and development of nuclear weapons, and even the commission of genocide, are permitted if perpetrated by the US and its allies and partners. Now, another shortcoming of the current international order is the over-reliance on the destructive power and the failure to share the burden fairly. Over the past 3 decades, the US has not made any efforts to engage with other parties, including its allies, when making critical decisions regarding wars and conflicts. I mean, the US normally forms small coalitions, initiates military action, and then subsequently attempts to convene an international conference for the purpose of peace building and burden sharing. In instances where the other parties are reluctant to collaborate and or join them in the conflict, the US withdraws from the situation and leaves the resolution of the conflict to other parties. I mean, the situation in Afghanistan is a good example of that approach, with the significant cost imposed on the region, particularly on its Afghan's neighbour, Iran. I mean, the final issue with the US-led order is the weaponization of finance and business as tools. I mean, the use of sanctions has led to the dissatisfaction amongst many countries, and even Western companies are now getting pretty angry about it. I mean, the high costs of direct conflict and the lack of interest in among Western societies is bearing these costs. And the US and allies have increasingly turned to economic and financial sanctions to try and advance their positions and undermine the positions of those who disagree with them. I mean, the current world order is now facing a new set of challenges. These have led to the dissatisfaction among countries, companies, and whole societies. Now, this has prompted a search for alternative solutions at regional and global levels. Now, it's essential that the alternative order be globally acceptable and respected. Now, the proposed order should be based on the UN and its global values and interests, which are non-intervention, respect for international and humanitarian law, human rights, multipolarity, indivisible security, peaceful development, peaceful coexistence, and opposition to unilateral coercive measures. Now, these values are all endorsed by BRICS member states and are more global and inclusive than the G7. Nevertheless, the mere presence of shared values is not enough. It's essential that these words have weight. Now, to what extent are the BRICS members capable of advancing an alternative order aligned with the UN and the global values? Well, in terms of military capabilities, the majority of the BRICS member states are well positioned to defend their interests. I mean, it's notable that each grouping comprises 3 nuclear powers. The US, the UK and France in the G7, and Russia, China and India in the BRICS. Now, despite the G7 members having access to alleged more advanced technology, they've not been instrumental in winning the majority of the significant conflicts since World War II. I mean, initially they failed in Korea and Vietnam, and since then in other conflicts. I mean, the US was unsuccessful in Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan, despite the fact that they had the more advanced weapons. I mean, Israel's been unable to achieve decisive victories against a small group in Palestine. Similarly, the provision of advanced technologies by NATO to the Ukraine has not resulted in the country achieving any success whatsoever on the battlefield. Now, on finance, in terms of purchasing power parity, the combined GDP of the BRICS countries has overtaken that of the G7. In 2023, the BRICS accounted for 32% of global GDP, while the G7 accounted for just 29%. I mean, according to IMF data, in 2024, emerging markets and developing economies which are seeking the reform in global governance, are expected to account for 59% of global GDP, while the developed economies will represent just 41%. I mean, the combined market size of BRICS countries is larger and they possess greater natural resources. They also have much better manufacturing setups. Furthermore, they also have a younger, more educated populations and a higher economic growth rate than the so-called advanced developed economies, whose economies are actually now in despair and decay. Now, in terms of geography, the BRICS group is more global and more exclusive than the G7. I mean, if you take out Japan, the G7 members are all Western countries. In contrast, the BRICS countries are located across a diverse range of continents. There's China in the Far East, Brazil in South America, Russia in the north, and down south you've got South Africa. Now, recently, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt in the centre have joined the group, also Ethiopia there, by the way. The BRICS alliance has the potential to establish a global network that will play an influential role in shaping global regulations. But for BRICS to do this, it needs to become a viable alternative to the existing global governance structures. And here's a few shortcomings that need to be addressed. Firstly, financial mechanisms. The lack of effectiveness of the EU-US sanctions is due to the fact that Russia has found a major way around it, and it's found other countries to do that, but it does need to be addressed that BRICS establish its own financial and legal frameworks to safeguard its member states, their businesses, their finance and organisation operating within or without links in the BRICS countries against these extraterritorial regulations and sanctions of the US and the EU. Now the next one is synergy. There's still room for improvements in the level of cooperation and coordination between BRICS member states in comparison with that of the G7. However, as long as the BRICS member states comply with the US-EU multilateral coercive measures against other countries, willingly or otherwise, they're just going to reinforce the current US-dominated international order, so they really need to stand up. Other countries will not see BRICS as a viable alternative unless BRICS members stand together. They need to see that that is the way forward. Now, connectivity is also a key factor in the development of the new governance system. Connectivity represents the third crucial element in the establishment of an alternative competitive global governance system. I mean, corridors of transportation and logistics are of particular importance, particularly in regions where the US cannot control, such as the new Silk Road, the North-South a transport corridor which connects India with Central Asia, the Caucasus and through Iran. I mean, a comprehensive and indivisible approach to security is needed. It's important to recognise that security cannot be limited to military and intelligence. It's also to prioritise economic, social and cyber security. And that's where the BRICS should focus its efforts on investing in economic and social development in West Asia, Central Asia, Africa and South America. By establishing these connections between the disparate developing nations worldwide, BRICS can effectively position itself as a potential alternative maker of the rules in global governance and align with the principles set forth by the UN. Okay, a fair bit for you to get through there. Now, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you've enjoyed this video, you can help me fund the channel and the website SCOBRICSinsight.com by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the screen. Thank you. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you all again soon.